Nearly 3 years ago in their world, our heroes were recruits in the BLACKWHEEL program, an off-book effort by the dragon-marked houses to train those with so-called aberrant marks as soldiers, and run by an organization called the Rekindlers. These students were meant to be a tool for the houses to take advantage of the chaos of war. The 4 of them made up a single unit, trained to work together. Ari, the Koravar with psychic abilities, Shade, the shifter whose mark wields the chaotic power of nature, Pog, the half-orc barbarian with a pyromantic mark, and Ezri, the Kalashtar with an innate necromantic ability. But with the end of the war came an end of the program. The heroes were told the program must shift purposes, but before they could learn what their new purpose would be, their guide and teacher, Soren Dimidani, was attacked by a senior member of the program, Thora Teveen, and her friend Dane. After a brief fight, Thora stayed to hold off the guards while Dane led the heroes out of the facility, explaining along the way that the usefulness of the program was at an end and the house intended to kill all the trained marked individuals and scrub the evidence. Led by Dane, the heroes escaped to the streets of the city of Korth, far below the floating citadel of the 12 that had been their home. Dane advised them to disappear, and then went back to find Thora. Left to their own devices, the group made their way to STORMREACH across the Thunder Sea. Along the way, Shade considered fleeing into the wild. The forest had always guarded her, ever since her days among the green singers of the Elding Reaches. But before she could, Ari noticed and convinced her to stay, to take a chance on family. After 18 months in STORMREACH, the group managed to find a home of sorts. Pog works as a bartender at the Sword and Shield, a bar sponsored by one of the town's militias, the Swords of Karn. Esri works making potions and toxins for a black market dealer called Geralt Goodblade, and Shade works as a thunder guide, leading expeditions out into the jungles of Zindrik and earning a good reputation, as the jungle seems to allow her to pass and rarely inflicts her with the Traveler's Curse, a phenomenon in which the jungle paths seem to shift and move unpredictably. Only Ari has refused to give up an adventurer's life, and frequently ventures into the Cross neighborhood, doing his best to secretly hinder those who would take advantage of the less fortunate, which often brings him into conflict with the city's gangs. Luckily, Ari seems to have a knack for being forgotten, a side effect of a curse laid on him long ago by the archfey known as the Forgotten Prince. But above all, they hide their marks. This relatively peaceful existence comes to a crashing end one day. After helping the famous explorer Hallis Martain deal with a minor mummy problem, the group return to the city in search of lunch. Instead, they find a young girl, Donabella Brightdoom, being pursued around the market by the animated contents of her mother's kitchen. Forced to subdue the girl, the reluctant rescuers hurry her inside, only to discover that she, like them, bears an aberrant dragon mark. Empathy overriding better sense, the group reveal their own marks to Donabella and her mother, before being kicked out of the house. Donabella's arrival reveals a rift in the party, fear of exposing themselves wars with concern for the girl's safety. A deep divide develops between Ari and Esri over the dangers of risking their anonymity in order to help the people around them. For the time, the conversation is tabled, and the characters decide to keep an eye on Donabella at a distance. Meanwhile, adventure finds our heroes. They help Pog's employer deal with a boggle infesting his bar, and Shade and Pog work together to free a jungle animal captured by House Vatalis. In the course of this, Pog wins a bet with the renowned gladiator Kolos and claims the Minotaur's axe, Fury's Edge, and Shade liberates Calumbra, a peacock-colored fey panther who becomes her closest friend and companion. In rescuing Cal, Shade learns that their marks can grow in both power and size, a discovery with worrying implications. At the same time, the heroes discover that another of their old BLACKWHEEL classmates, Tommel, survived the disastrous mission into the Mournland and has taken up with a violent gang known as the STORMHAMMERS, believing the visions of their leader Mirren will make a better world for those with aberrant marks. The question of whether or not to get involved comes to find the heroes when Mrs. Brightdoom arrives on their doorstep. Donabella has gone missing, and after harsh words with Mrs. B, the characters promise to help find her daughter. The trail leads to the Rubble Warren, where they meet the Rubble Warren Gang, a group of children who create and complete their own quests in their longing to become heroes. They are led by a human boy named Cadric, and include the half-orc Bajok, a scion of House Tharashk, a drow girl named Ilya, whose tattoos hint at true adventures in the jungle, and a kobold named Levexi, who lost her clan in the Undercity and now lives in the Warren. From the gang, the party discovers that Donabella went into the Undercity on a quest, and the heroes follow after her. Finding Donabella in a giant crypt, the heroes begin to make their way out only to discover that the Rebel Warren gang have followed them in as well. Grabbing the children and rescuing a Vatalus agent from a swarm of Kruthik, the heroes escape the catacomb back to the surface, only to find themselves trapped by the Stormhammers. Unwilling to let the Vatalus agent be murdered, the players fight, only for the combat to be interrupted by a masked vigilante called the White Raven, who steals something from Tommel, recovered in the catacombs, before escaping, pursued by the Stormhammers. After returning Donabella and her friends home, the heroes have their first experience of genuine thanks, receiving crafted goods from Ilia's tribe, the Moonspears, and sandwiches from Mrs. Brightdoom. Once again, the group tries to find a normal life. Ari learns Giant by apprenticing at Black Iron, a smithy run by Hular, the father of their friend Solarka. Pog plucks up his courage and asks Solarka on a date. Shade gets advice on caring for a panther from her friend Harish, another shifter and proprietor of the Ship's Cat, a feline-friendly eatery, and Esri convinces Geralt to build him an alchemist's workshop. But once again, normal does not last. Tommel arrives, informing Ari that since the group disrupted his attempt to recover an artifact from the catacombs, they'll need to steal a map for him. If they refuse, the Rebel Warren gang will be in danger. A debate ensues over whether to attack the Stormhammers or do the job. But eventually, the group agrees to do Tommel's job, after doing their best to warn and protect the children. Esri and Pog go to case the map shop, while Shade and Ari go to speak to the Wayfinders Foundation, an explorers guild based in a giant ruin called the Nest, about the destination of the map, Hakeb Kalnek, the Obsidian City. In the course of their research, Shade asks Halis Martain about her recurring dream of a city in the trees being destroyed, and learns the legend of Shaitirias Tulai, a Fey spire once found in the deeps of Zindrik that was discovered, destroyed, and plundered by the giants of the Kulsir Dominion in ages long past. Meanwhile, Pog convinces Esri that they should simply go for the map immediately. Pog hides himself in the shop using his newfound ability to become invisible, yet another incarnation of the strange phenomenon Esri has noted of some sort of spirit protecting Pog in danger. Then Pog waits for the shop to close so he can steal the map. After waiting the day away, Shade and Ari become concerned and go to find their friends. Finding Esri in the market, they also discover that their old BLACKWHEEL combat instructor, Falco de Dineth, is there with a few of his men. When Pog bursts out of the shop and makes a run for it, Falco and his men pursue, followed by Pog's friends in a chaotic street chase. Pog is cornered by Falco, but is saved by a necromancer, who unleashes a group of zombies against Falco and his men and demands the map. In fear and rage, Pog unleashes his growing mark and sets the alley on fire. Arriving moments later, Ari sees the fire and the corpses of the zombies and fears that his friends are all dead. Lost to rage, he attacks Falco, kills some of his men, and is nearly killed himself. The whole group arrives to find themselves cornered by Falco, only to be rescued by a mysterious cloaked woman who creates a darkness to let them escape. Fleeing into the woods for the night, the shaken heroes regroup, accuse one another, and debate what to do now with the map and themselves. After long discussion, they decide to follow through and turn the map over to Tommel. To their surprise, Tommel simply accepts the map, clears their debt with the Stormhammers, and promptly disappears into the jungle with the rest of the gang. Pog and Shade go to tell the Brightdooms and the Moonspear that the danger is past, and discover that the Moonspears have taken matters into their own hands and killed at least one Stormhammer to send a message. Ilia's father, Soleil, tells Shade that she can call on them at need, that those who will risk themselves for you are family. Pog speaks to Mrs. B and learns a bit more of her history. She tells him that Donabella has already lost her brother and father, and that friendship with her comes with obligation to be careful, and not to let her lose more. Back at their home, Pog tells Ari that he feels like Ari has been ignoring the opinions of the rest of the group, which triggers a long-held fear in Ari that his mark might be inadvertently manipulating those around him to do what he wants. That same morning, Esri discovers that the bust they received as a reward for helping Halis with his mummy contains the spirit of a long-dead elf and is in fact a spirit idol, whose voice his mark allows him to hear. Shaking his very understanding of the world, the elf, Jaler Alarinthi, tells Esri that his mark is not an aberrant mark at all, but a mark of death, born of old by the elven house Vol. However, Esri's lack of what Alarinthi sees as proper respect prevents the conversation from going further for the time being. Some while later, on a visit to Solarka, Pog is confronted by Kolos, who demands a rematch during the opening week of the gladiatorial games in the Red Ring. Pog joins a group of would-be gladiators in a battle in the ring, a battle in which Pog once again humiliates Kolos and discovers that one of the other combatants is none other than Solarka herself, still seeking her own adventures. However, the games are interrupted by the same necromancer that disrupted Pog's escape with the map. Leading a troop from the Order of the Emerald Claw, the necromancer Demise raises the bones of those who have died in the ring, and a fight ensues. The heroes manage to stop the attack, but are then detained by the Iron Watch, a warforged militia that handles threats to the city, and discover that the Stormlords are considering turning them over to the Rekindlers, the very order of House Medani that their old teacher, Sorin, belonged to in the BLACKWHEEL program. However, as the party sit powerless, awaiting to be told their fate, Thora Tavine enters the room and buys their freedom in exchange for military secrets from her time working for the Brelish government. After acquiring their freedom, Thora tells the party that she is at the end of her rope and has nowhere else to go. But she wants their help in creating a place where marked people like them don't have to be afraid and can live normal lives. Away from the entrenched power of the houses, she hopes that STORMREACH can be that place. She tells them of her plan to found a school and safe house for marked individuals. And though they are uncertain they can trust her, the group decides to help. Over the next several weeks, the heroes help Thora take ownership of GREYMALKIN Manor, an abandoned estate floating above STORMREACH, where they meet and befriend Puzzledust, a fairy dragon, and fight off efforts by both the Bilge Rats and the Golden Lions to claim the same space. Ari comes clean to the group about the curse of forgetfulness, and gives Shade his first journal so that if the worst happens, she will still have a chance to remember him. Ari and Esri both seek Thora's help to understand their marks, as Ari fears he cannot control it, and Esri fears that if his mark is a so-called true mark, he might lose his place at the school. They carry out their first mission as vigilantes, disrupting an attempt to smuggle a vampire into the city, and they raid a warehouse in which they discover the dragon-marked houses have been using the Bilge Rats to smuggle things into and out of STORMREACH, including some sort of strange mage-bred creature created by House Vatalus, and an unusual warforge covered in crystals and bearing what seems to be an aberrant dragon mark. All the while, Thora seeks students and teachers for GREYMALKIN Academy, as the start of the school year approaches. Yet all the while, Shade has been having steadily worsening nightmares of Shaytirias Talai. A voice in her dream urges her on to seek the city, to find her, and soon Shade decides she must go. With the help of a new teacher at the school, Arlo Fletcher, the heroes make a foray into the Feywild, entering into a fairy story about a young half-dryad who has grown bitter and cold and deadly. At the climax, rather than hand the girl over to her dryad mother to repeat her tale for all eternity, the heroes pull her from the story and the Feywild. But this intervention draws the attention of the Forgotten Prince, who takes Ari and the fairy dragon Puzzledust as payment, erasing all memory of them from the material plane. Back in STORMREACH, Shade, Pog, and Esri help the young half-dryad make herself at home in the grove outside GREYMALKIN Manor, and help her name herself River. Pog and Esri debate the merits of keeping the House Vatalus experiments stolen from the warehouse in which Forge was found, and all the gang learn that Thora's former partner Dane is in town. They learn that Dane is scoping out an attack on a House Kenneth facility, and he invites them to take part, but after a conversation with Thora, they agree that it would draw too much attention to the school, and decline. Meanwhile, Shade wants to make another attempt at the Feywild, and approaches the Guardians of Rushame, an organization of giants living in an encampment nearby. The giantess Galranak agrees to help Shade reach the Feywild via a magical ritual, and the trio are transported to Shaytirias Talai. At the same time, Ari has been navigating the Feywild with Puzzledust, encountering its many strange denizens in an attempt to find the Forgotten Prince. Eventually, Ari negotiates their return and the lifting of the curse in exchange for a promise of 12 services he will perform. Ari is then transported to Shaytirias Talai just as his friends have arrived, and the reunited party battle an undead giant in the ancient city. After the battle with the giant, Esri tests out the growing power of his mark and raises a skeleton to undeath, thereby drawing the attention of the Arani Death Guard, an order of elven knights who patrol ancient ruins hunting the undead. When Esri displays his mark openly, the Death Guard attack, and though the party are victorious, Esri is killed. But in death, Esri meets a half-dragon woman calling herself Erandis and bearing the same mark as Esri. She agrees to send him back and offers him the names of those loyal to her whose aid he might call on. With Esri recovered, the party sets forth into Shaytirias Talai, eventually meeting a pair of Kitsune who agree to guide them to the Sphinx that dwells in the city. Shade meets the Sphinx Harazi, who reveals that Shade is not a shifter, but a Kitsune, one of the forest folk who dwelt in Shaitirias Talai thousands of years ago. When Harazi's people were destroyed by the giants, she had found refuge with the Fae of the city, but her presence drew the same giants, and in desperation, Harazi used her magic to transport hundreds of kitsune, including a young shade, into the future, but her magic went wrong and scattered them in time and space. Harazi has spent all the long years seeking them to provide them with aid and guidance, and has only been able to reach shade in her dream memories of the terrible assault on the city by the giants of the Kulsir Dominion. After teaching Shade how to shift her form as a kitsune and giving her gifts, Harazi sends the party back to GREYMALKIN. The party returns on the first day of class to discover the students under threat from the House Vatalus experiment Ezri and Pog have left locked in the basement. The party, now known as the Strike Force, destroy the monster and are introduced to the first class of GREYMALKIN Academy: Pip, Mo, Kara, Nisaria, and Donabella. Kara and Ezri get off to a rocky start when she enters his room in search of the spirit idol Ezri keeps there. Speaking with the ancient elven spirit, she learns that Ezri bears the mark of death and panics. After intervention by Thora, she agrees to keep his secret. The Strike Force ventures into the nest to sell some elven artifacts to the Wayfinders, and while there are attacked by another former BLACKWHEEL member and current Stormhammer, Callan. Much changed since his foray into the jungle and proclaiming himself a herald of Kulsir. He is accompanied by mutated agents of the Emerald Claw bearing numerous aberrant dragon marks. In a brutal fight that nearly destroys the nest, the Strike Force managed to kill Callan and prevent him from stealing the artifact he had been sent to acquire. This alarms the party, but they find themselves frustrated when the authorities don't see the attack as a portent of doom. Following the attack, the Strike Force accept another job from Thora's old Citadel contact, Lucan, who asks them to provide a distraction to keep the Emerald Claw busy long enough for him and his team to infiltrate the organization's base and steal a powerful weapon he believes they have. Enlisting the aid of the Knights of Thrain, the Strike Force engages the White Raven and the Emerald Claw in battle near the docks and successfully buys at Lucan enough time to complete his operation. The victorious Strike Force collects their reward and heads to the ship's cat for dinner. But Pog instead ventures to the Church of the Silver Flame to investigate an encounter he'd had there earlier. Pog finds that he can hear a voice in the flame calling his name and calling him a ghost guardian, calling on him to put himself as a shield between the innocent and those who would harm or oppress them. Pog is uncertain and his friends advise caution, but all this is interrupted by the return of Hallis Martin, last known to have ventured toward the Obsidian City deep in the jungle, the same destination the Stormhammers had been seeking. Though Hallis seems more or less himself, the return of both him and Callan causes the Strike Force to wonder exactly what went on in the jungles. Before they can learn, though, Hallis is attacked by the White Raven, demanding to know what happened to the Emerald Claw agents Hallis had been guiding. In that fight, Hallis reveals an unexpected power to create minor earthquakes, severely damaging the ship's cat. The Strike Force intervenes, blinding the White Raven and attempting to deceive him long enough to get answers. But in the end, the White Raven merely departs after claiming his intent to get vengeance on Pog for perceived insults to his person. Returning to the Academy, the Strike Force is surprised to find Mrs. Brightdoom, Donabella's mother, who reveals that she works for House Vatalus, and that she learned recently that Dane and his companions were captured during their attack on the Kenneth facility and have been transported to an off-the-books Vatalus facility. While it is agreed that Thora should not go herself in order to rescue Dane, the Strike Force begin preparing to do exactly that.